Hello, and thank you for joining us for our very first episode of Louisiana Public Health Institute's new Health Table Talk series. I'm Shelina Davis, your host and the CEO of the Louisiana Public Health Institute. I pray that you and your family are safe and well, and that you are finding ways to help and support one another as we navigate through the impacts of COVID-19 in our nation, our state, and of course, in our own communities. The Louisiana Public Health Institute is a statewide, community-focused nonprofit committing to ensuring that all Louisianans have a just and fair opportunity to be healthy and well. We do this through authentic partnership with community and partners, through community engagement, using data and research for action, project design, management and implementation, policy and advocacy, technology solutions, and providing fiscal and administrative support to our partnering organizations. We're headquartered in New Orleans and have staff in all 9 regions across the state of Louisiana who work on an array of public health topics, from tobacco prevention and control to building healthier communities, to assessing our community's needs and developing out plans to address these needs, and to supporting the whole health of individuals and families from early childhood to older adults. At LPHI, we believe that everything is public health, and we are launching our Health Table Talk series as a way to continue to engage and inform our communities as we enter into the next phase of this pandemic. Our hope is that through this dialogue, we'll have an open and informed conversation about the public health issues that are currently impacting us in our communities and in our daily lives. As we begin this next phase, it's important that we focus on healing our communities and each other. While so many are focused on the physical, economic, or mental healing of communities, we can't forget about spiritual healing. We're all grieving right now and dealing with some sort of loss. Many of us are dealing with the loss of a loved one, a friend, a community member, or a colleague. Many more of us are dealing with the loss of a job, our schools, our friends, and all of us are dealing with the loss of our daily way of life. The loss of our daily and weekly routine can feel like a loss of community. For many in Louisiana, worship and community go hand in hand. In a time where we want to turn to God, we aren't able to do so in the comfort of our own place of worship. To help us find our way through all of this, I'm excited to have with us today our very first special guest, Reverend Darcy Roake. She is a Unitarian Universalist Minister with a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. She also has been a leading advocate for social justice and pastoral care with organizations like Oxfam America, Amnesty International, and the United Nations.
Reverend Darcy, thank you so much for joining us today on this first edition of Health Table Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad y'all are doing this. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. So Reverend Darcy, we know, as I mentioned earlier, you have a background in pastoral care. And we, as I also mentioned, we're dealing with a great deal of loss right now. So can you kind of share how important it is for us to pay attention to how our spiritual health is right now, and what should we be doing to sustain and improve it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think about the ways in which our mental and spiritual and physical health is really all tied together in so many different ways. And right now I'm thinking about, for example, physically being inside a lot of times, both mentally and spiritually. There's something about that. Of course, the loss that people are experiencing, the loss of jobs, the loss of economic opportunity, the loss of, what one could say, their usual routine, is particularly important to think about in terms of spiritual health. What is keeping them connected to others, to the divine as they see it, and also to nature, to the natural world that they're less a part of a connection to right now. For me, one of the things that has been interesting is the return of the telephone call. So a big thing that has been in our community is actually just calling people, hearing people's voices. So we set up a phone tree, and then I speak to congregants every day, just talking to them, just saying hello. I also think about the ways that we're trying to, in these conversations also, I think there's something important about acknowledging that, of course, there are different levels about where people are at, and I think that's really important too, because I think there's needs to be acknowledgement of privilege at this time. At the same time, I think it's important to also recognize that, that it is really hard, for example, for parents who are both working 2 jobs, for example, at home now and trying to homeschool their children. It is really hard for older folks who are scared to leave their homes. It is really hard for people who have necessary jobs, let's say beyond healthcare workers, but who work at grocery stores, need to take public transportation. And when they leave the house, there's this stress and anxiety about even what that looks like. And then people getting sick and family members. So I think just like sort of in mental health, there's an acknowledgement that needs to be there about how difficult it is. And I think spiritually, I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And you can ground that in hope, and you can ground that in connection with the divine as well. But I try really hard not to just jump to hope, because you don't want to deny where people are feeling right now, and then help them connect to, okay, what is life-giving for you right now? Is it that morning walk? Is it doing a prayer in the evening? Is it connecting by virtual worship, even if it's not perfect, on a Sunday morning? Is it that phone call with someone else? What is life-giving with so much that is life-taking at this moment in time? So that's some of what I'm thinking around that.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. So, as I mentioned, faith is an important part of everyday life for so many of us, and much more so during times of disaster. And so what are you doing for alternative worship to keep your congregation engaged, and how have they adapted?
I'll be honest, it's a little hard. So churches, not all, but many churches tend to have older members. We also have young parents. So we've got those 2 groups. And right now, younger parents are pretty overwhelmed with a lot going on. And then our older folks are a little scared and intimidated by technology. So it may not be that they're going to necessarily on the first time respond to a text where you're saying, click here to do the online worship. And, a lot of, I joke that I was not hired for my tech skills to be a minister, but I've had to do a quick learning curve. I think a lot of us have, about moving, for example, our worship. So for me, it was really important that we had consistency. That in this time where we don't have much understanding of what we can plan or what can be consistent, for me, it was, we always have our services on Sunday at 11 a.m. We will always have our services on Sunday at 11 a.m. online. We did it first by Facebook. Now we're trying Zoom, and then record the services and are able to send it out to our folks who aren't on Facebook or Zoom through that way. What has happened is I have been still doing sort of the traditional preaching, though I know that certain models have gone more towards more of a homily, kind of a shorter connection. Which makes a lot of sense too. But we have become heavy right now in our worship on what we call joys and sorrows. So in each of our worships, actually, we're a pastoral sized congregation. So not huge. So that allows us actually during our worship service to have people lift up the joys that have happened for them this week, even if they're small. And we light candles for that. And we also light candles for the sorrows that have happened. And sometimes we light the candles for the ones that are unspoken as well. And that gives this ritual space. And that ritual has expanded more and more to involve that. And we can do that virtually. To go back to just really quickly, too, about different ways to express faith, one of the things that we've been doing in our church is how can people get involved to help? Because that's also part of it. That's part of our faith lens is like, who's the helpers in this point in time, and how would that be helpful? So we have folks, for example, who are making masks. That's something we can do. I mean, in New Orleans, a lot of us know how to sew, and it's making masks, checking on neighbors at a safe distance, and figuring out what that looks like. So technology has helped us do that too. So for example, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out, and then we've been posting a lot on Facebook and a lot virtually, trying to get out as much information as possible, including, and I may be answering a future question, but including health information, really ways to be safe at this time, ways to access food resources if you need that, ways to help support other individuals getting food resources. We are a sanctuary church, i.e. we support the undocumented community. So at this time, they're not receiving benefits. So we are trying to figure out ways to kind of help support filled that gap as a church. And a lot of that has gone online because we're not having these in-person meetings or these connections. So the foundation of consistency, the pastoral care, which has really turned into phone calls to each other, information in that way, deliveries if needed, we do safely. And that's how we've kind of tried to continue to adjust in these times. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that you hit on consistency and ritual in that response. And I actually want to shift a little bit too, because, one of the things we talked about, even before this interview today, was around how are folks continuing to ritualize loss during this time. One of the hardest things in our community right now that we're dealing with is the inability to hold those traditional funerals, for loved ones who pass as a result of COVID or other health conditions. So, what have you been doing to help ritualize loss within your congregation, and what do you recommend for family, friends in the community who have lost a loved one and are exploring alternative ways to honor them?
Absolutely. Well, one piece I go back to, I was a hospital chaplain at Massachusetts General Hospital several years ago, and I worked on the oncology unit, and a lot of my pastoral care was actually with the caregivers, so with the nurses. And I use this model a lot. Again, it's that ritual. Once a year, I worked with several nurses on the floor to put together a ritual of sort of almost, as I said, the joys and sorrows ritual of placing a stone of sadness as well as a flower of hope, so that, and the naming of people. Because on the oncology unit, people would come and go, and the nurses they created these amazing relationships over like a couple of years. And people would either thankfully survive and really not be back in the hospital, or many of them would die. And the healthcare workers needed a space too to mourn that, because they built these relationships. And so we created this ritual, and we said their names, and we rang bells, and we laid down these stones, and it was a little thing, but even just that physical act was really important. And so for individuals who've lost people in this time, and I want to say people who've died in this time, including people who have died beyond COVID-19, because they are not given the ability to mourn in the same way either, is to recognize that there will be a time when they can gather and really remember in a very specific, culturally specific way that we are used to in the United States with more people around, and to really consider what household rituals would look like with your family, laying of the stones, public art and expression. Notice throughout the city, again, safe distance, but being able to put art out into the world and have an expression of an individual in that way. I was mentioning to you in a conversation a bit ago that I had the honor of attending a memorial service for Reverend William Barnwell, who's an incredible social justice minister here in New Orleans, who died several weeks ago of COVID-19. And Pastor Gregory Manning organized this memorial service for him, where we all showed up in cars. So we were at safe distance. We showed up in cars, we lined up, and we did a procession of like 100 cars down the street. And then we ended by going around and going to the home of his widow. And all that she was doing was standing on the front porch, just receiving our love and care. And I've heard of that actually now several times been happening, where individuals stand outside and receive the care that people come by in their cars. And it's a little thing, but it was so meaningful. It truly was. And so I think at this time, people are finding creative ways. We've always, as so many across cultures, found ways to mourn and grieve and have ritual and celebrate and have joy. And right now, I think is a point where we're finding out, what does that look like in this physically distanced time? And I like to say physically distanced because it's not always socially distanced. I mean, there is that connection, but we need to find different ways. We need to imagine different ways of making that connection
Yes, thanks so much. And again, picking up on that connection, there are some of us who are not currently connected to a faith-based organization or home. So what would you recommend to someone who's not currently connected or part of a faith-based organization, but wants to connect with one during this time?
Actually, so it's so interesting. I think it's actually a really perfect time for people to begin to connect, because sometimes, for example, my faith community, we have a lot of folks who may have been hurt in the past by their faith community and want to join a community but are nervous about walking through those doors. And so it takes several times for them to do that. If that's you, or if you're a little nervous sometimes about going to a faith community, now is the time where most of the worships are now online. Now you can actually really get a feel. Now you won't get a feel for the whole community. It is not the same thing. I am very much looking forward to be back in my sanctuary one day, back in the sanctuary one day. But until then, we have folks who are now listening in on our services everywhere from England to Mauritius. Like it's allowing this connection. And so I would say for folks to look online, check out websites, and then see when virtual worships are happening. And then go for a couple of weeks and try out different ones, see what you're connecting with. And then if possible, call the church office and see if you can have a phone call either with the minister or with somebody who works in membership, or just to get to know what's happening in the church, and also to have a conversation. I think, ministers right now are dealing with a lot, as we're saying, with tech and this, and rabbis and imams are dealing with a lot with tech and all of this. But at the same time, one thing that this moment has shown is it's bringing us back to our foundations of what is a church community. And so many of the foundations are about pastoral care, about really being present for people and helping the divine in their life come to fruition in times of trouble, in times of real grief and sorrow. And so if someone wants to get involved with the community and also wants to have a serious pastoral conversation, I promise you that most of the time in terms of outreach, you will be able to have that conversation with a religious leader in one way or the other, whether it's a lay leader or clergy in the church. And so I think those first steps, and then honestly seeing how you can help. If you want to get involved in a community, we often think about that. You go and you show up, and we don't have that anymore. We don't have the social justice meeting we can go to or the church meeting we can go to in the same way. But as I mentioned, with mask making, with finding resources for people who at this time could use more support, or if you yourself need more support, that connection is still there. We're still trying to find ways to connect. Yeah.
Yes, that's so true. So, as we kind of close out today's interview, I guess what are some kind of last reflections or words you'd like to leave with us around spiritual health, or, just insights or reflections as we leave this interview today?
This time is can be one of the more spiritually difficult times that many of us have encountered in our lives. And it also opens up so many spiritual possibilities. And by that, I mean deep reflection of our lives, of who we are. I also think, and I'm going to show my colors here, I'm a progressive minister. I think it has us think about, how do we truly care for people in this country, and how are we not caring for them at this time? And how do we desperately need to actually really be making the change, and honestly having churches be part of that conversation? How do we mean more care, more compassion, more love, more equity into this world? And how does that need to actually be happening now? And how will our spiritual lives play a role in that, so that we, not only will we be fulfilled as whole people, we can help kind of create a world where we're more and more whole and more connected. And so in this time of disconnection, as we say, in this physically distanced time, the irony is we're thinking about, when we come together again, who do we want to be? Not only as faith communities and individuals, but as a country and as a people. And, we've had many of these reckonings in the past, and many others have reckoned with this far more than, for example, I have. And what does this moment in time mean when we really are going to be trying to connect more and more? Do we have this opportunity, and are we going to take this opportunity in the future? And I hope we do.
Oh, Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Darcy. I really appreciate you for joining our very first Health Table Talk and sharing your insights with all of us. You've given us a lot to think about, especially as we are on our own spiritual journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And again, thank you for all that y'all are doing.
Thank you so much for joining us for the first edition of Health Table Talk. I hope you learned something new through our conversation because I know I did. As we discussed today, we have all been impacted by COVID-19 in some way or the other. I want to remind all of you of the importance of protecting yourself and protecting each other going forward. Remember, mask up. Cover your nose and mouth with a mask or face covering when you're going out for essential items. This is the best way to protect yourself and to protect each other. Stay at home. Staying at home during phase 1 is the safest way to protect yourself, especially if you're sick or have a diagnosis of COVID-19. And if you are someone who's over the age of 65 or have a pre-existing underlying health condition, we recommend that you also stay at home and get your neighbor or your friend or your family member to go out and get your essential items for you during this time. Also remember, if you are and do have to go out, remember to physically distance, but always stay socially connected. It's important that when we're out in public, we ensure that we're staying 6 feet away from one another. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay well. And remember, we'll get through this together.